I have pressed the start recording button, which means we're going. Good evening, everyone. It is not the evening, it's the afternoon, but it's the evening in your timeline because that's how this technology works. Good evening. Yes, it's Rail Natter. It's episode 258. A delight to have you along. Waiting in the green room is Will Deakin, which I'm very excited. Will and I have been meaning to do this for bloody years, and this is the first part. This is the first in like a 4 to 5 part series that may then get expanded and renewed for further. But we'll come to those. For now, we're trying to be reasonably focused, but we are talking tonight about data. And I'm quite excited to talk about data because data underpins a lot of the fun Natter episodes. And we've not done a data-driven Natter episode for a while, actually. We've not done a kind of procedurally drawn railway network for a little while, and we are going to be doing more of those this year. We're going to be picking up some regions and doing those. We're going to do some split Yorkshire into various bits and have a look at East Yorkshire, or you know, and you know, I was up in Skinning Grove over the Easter holidays in Whitby and thinking about the rail network up there, and Cleveland Redcar kind of area. There's and North Devon is an area that I definitely want to do, and we need to revisit various other parts of the country as well. There's a lot of fun areas that we should be looking at in terms of rail network based on a data-driven approach, looking at one narrow element. We'll get to this, the population, but anyway. So this is why I wanted Will on to talk to us about this, but not just spatial data. We're going to talk about temporal data as well. And we're going to crack on because I want this to be nice and swift. So everyone, welcome to tonight. Will's waiting in the wings, wait for me to go, but we are going to get there. But it only remains for me to, first of all, select my pointer option and go, let's select pen. There we go. And say, everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades from view, fades beautifully away, we must start with this glorious picture, Will, which is very, very nice indeed. We have no news tonight. We just have this picture of Will for the entire hour, where we'll explore this picture and all of the emotions and vibes that are going. No, as I bring our two small faces in, Will, hello. In fact, before we talk about this picture, in fact, you know what? Yes, no, we will pause this picture momentarily because I want to introduce Will. Will, hello. It's a delight to have you on. Hi. It's good to see. Lovely bit of mug work there as well. Marvellous. Yes, so before we talk about a past version of yourself, Will, who are you and what? Well, tell us a bit about it. Introduce yourself to those for those who may not know, but I know there'll be lots of people in the chat now who know you because you're a regular in the Discord server. You're a feature of the Rail Natter community, but for certain. But Will, for those who don't know you, who are you? And what do you do?
So I'm Will Deacon. I kind of work for Network Rail, but that's kind of not really what I'm here to talk about, although I kind of deal with a lot of national IT systems. So what I do is I'm interested in data, and I kind of like the job because I like to lean into things with public transport. I think that's really important. I'm probably less interested in trains directly, but more the good that trains can do, and I think that's kind of a thing. And you know, as we'll discuss in a minute, I'm kind of a physicist by training, and a bunch of what I've been doing is try and kind of look at making data, what I describe as helping data to make sensible decisions about public transport.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of, that's part of the, I would say, our collaborations that we'll talk about a bit, and or rather the times that I've gone, oh, Will, can you make this thing happen? And you've gone, well, probably, yeah. And then we kind of have chats and a thing appears, and then I attempt to make use of it, and then vice versa occasionally. Well, yeah. All of that is that, like, I enjoy the fact that, well, firstly, you have the ability to make this stuff happen in terms of the data. It's all very well knowing the data's there, but you have to be able to do something with it and manipulate it and you know, handle the data as plasticine and turn it into something, and that's what you're good at. Which then I suppose means we have to return to the past very briefly as we go, okay, so you've got your eyes closed, your hair's swooped over, you're looking very hip, It's not quite Twink era, Will, but we're kind of, so this is, and there's wooden benches behind you. It's looking kind of like universities still did just about when I was in them.
So I think one of the important things is I am very old. So this is kind of late 80s, early 90s in the X-ray lab at Birmingham University. And that's me possibly looking ever so slightly hungover, but I couldn't possibly admit to that, while having dushed because I was late to go to a lab and holding toast. So this is my picture that I refer to as quantum toast.
Yeah. That's it. And with surrounded by wires and oscilloscopes and all sorts of good stuff. There's a lot of vibes going on in this picture. Like I would describe this picture as like seething boffinry. There is about to be some boffinry afoot. We don't do enough boffinry in this country anymore. Actually, we've had it management consultanted out of us. But I say that one of the few things we have in this country is a great tradition. There are several traditions that we have that are pretty suspect, but generally, I would say that our relationship with boffinry is a positive one, and boffinry is something that to be celebrated. And I'd say that there is about to be some boffinry afoot here. And Will, I hope you don't mind be offended. I'd say you continue to hold up boffinry in the highest tradition, which is much to your credit. So, before I waffle ourselves into oblivion, let us talk. Well, firstly, so I've nicked a lot of these slides from a much longer presentation that is online. People can go and find bits of, if not like various bits of presentations you've done. Will, they're online. They're all over the place. So people can search Will Deakin presentation or Will Deakin seminar. And these things will pop up. You've done presentations for the Permanent Way Institution for us in York. Back when we were the York section. But yeah, you can find those things. But I've stolen and wrangled a few of your slides into a kind of a natter narrative, if you like, as is kind of tradition. But this one I kept pretty much as is because it's lovely and it's a nice kickoff. And I suppose, yeah, it's a nice story being told by what is essentially an old, a stencil sort of painted stone information block giving us, mileage, ELR. Well, actually, in this case, not mileage, giving us a bridge number and some distances. It doesn't have ELR, but these bridge plates exist today, and there's data there. And I suppose, Will, data is everywhere, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I was trying to make. I mean, so I kind of, part of the reason why I got into this, and I've probably got lots of iterations, is I started doing with COVID, I started doing some of the online digital festivals, and I thought, well, I give it a bit of a spin. So following, we kind of did that stuff with PWI. I did some of the stuff at Yorick. Yeah. And then, well, everybody's sitting in their front room or in their back room, kind of locked in because we had COVID. So people started doing these kind of these kind of digital festivals, and so I kind of put in, and they did a couple of online ones, and you need content. And this was one of the things I was trying to make, is that there's a lot of data out there in the railway, and a lot of it's really quite physical in a way that if you're kind of like me and you work in IT, you kind of miss sometimes, and I quite like that. So I was just wandering around Sheffield, and I spotted the bridge, and I thought there's quite a lot of stuff encoded in that, based on, as you said, there's a bridge number, but there's also a map underneath there because it's got 158 miles and 24 chains from somewhere.
Yes.
And it's like, where the hell does that come from?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you start peeling back the layers of yes, but what is what particular truth is that referring to? And this is, you said this was Sheffield, right? Well, there are the whole bunch of confusing truths in Sheffield because a little bit up from where that picture was taken, you had some much smaller numbers because they were counting from a different set of buffer stops in a different end of the country. With the what became the Great Central, its buffer stop, it was measuring its mileages from Manchester over a different route, rather than the most railways up in our part of the neck of the woods are measuring from London. Other than when they're not. Apart
from the famous one in York. So if you kind of walk across the bridge, sorry, I mean, this because we've kind of met there before, and it's just like, oh, this is 0.0. It's kind of really.
Yeah. The Hudson Empire means that there is a 0 mile post just sat on a platform next to the just on the way between platforms 9 and 5, about halfway between the two next to the Costa. You can find the platforms, the 0 mile post, which is kind of fun. So yeah, data, and data is. It's not just numbers in a spreadsheet. In fact, it's kind of least usefully numbers in a spreadsheet. But equally, it's often numbers in a spreadsheet. But those numbers don't necessarily... They mean things. They both do and do not mean anything. They can mean nothing without context, right? So the context is really important. And even when you have the parameters that allow you to know what that information is. Like, for example, as you say, mileage. Well, okay, we can work out where the buffer stops are and what that mileage refers to. It's like, well, what does that actually mean to anyone or anything? The context then is really important. It's not very well going, well, I've got this data and it says this. That's why I'm always a little bit skeptical of some of the sorts of data events that go on. I don't want to hate on hackathons, but often they're talking about data that is perfect and marvelous, and or certainly in the past. I think they've got better more recently, but certainly in the earlier days of hackathons, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, they were often like basically idealizing data, and they didn't actually. And the context is really important, and also the context of who are the people that we're mucking around with this data and impacting on, and how are we thinking about what the social context of that data is. Particular ethics in data is a thankfully reasonably hot topic at the moment, but you always got to have these contexts. So with that in mind, I wanted to start us off on, there are a couple of big tales I wanted to talk about, and one of them is temporal and one of them is spatial. I've said maps, it's funny, I've said maps and data as the title to this episode, Will, but actually that's kind of a bit of a nonsense, because maps is data. It's all data. Yep. It's all data.
It's data all the way down.
It's data all the way down, yeah, that's it. So we're going to start with talking about a form of temporal data. This is me being a bit cheeky, because actually we're going to talk about some timetable development. So, Will, I'm kind of going to let you lead on this and tell the story. But here is a diagram. And tell us about this diagram before I make some arrows appear on it.
No, that's absolutely fine. So, I mean, there's a couple of things about this. So one of the things is that I sometimes do some stuff with the European Agency for Railways, and when we were part of it, and I still kind of keep a hand in that kind of space. And they kind of broke down in the regulation of data, because there's a whole slew, of course, it's the European Union, so we have to have regulation. And they broke it down into these 4 areas, planning, train preparation, train operations, and wagon management. Well, the wagon management's kind of probably more around, just general unit management, but you tend not to change passenger trains so much. So there you go. It's kind of, one of the things I quite like is to have a really simple, stupid model as a physicist, take a spherical cow in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I can run a railway with those 4 boxes. There you go.
Yep.
And it's just that. And you start off with. And the other thing about it is the kind of whole idea of the timetable is absolutely key. And I didn't realise this before kind of getting more involved. I mean, I've been in the railway about 8 or 9 years. Is just how crucial it is to the operation of all this stuff. I mean, there's even a song in Czechoslovak that I can bore you with sometime. Which actually talks about, the timetable is the perfect product of the human mind. And it's just that. So you plan right and everything will go well with the world.
And the planning is the key thing. We're going to start talking about planning. So as we work our way through this, we're going to start by talking specifically about planning, right? So... Yeah. Which bumps us to our next slide. There's also there aren't many of your photographs of bears remaining in the slide deck, but I thought I'd leave a couple in. So you might have to explain the context of the bears in a moment. But for the moment, we have an X diagram with 6 things surrounding. For the audio only people, we have performance, strategic planning, access planning, timetable assessment, operations surrounding a giant timetable with the echo switched up to maximum. So Will, explain to us what's going on.
So. In the British Railway and more generally, you just kind of break timetabling down into these kind of areas. So it's sort of like a loop round what actually happens. So you want to use strategic planning. So maybe you want to build a high-speed railway between, I don't know, the north of England and somewhere in the south of England. And that's probably something you want to think about 15 or 20 years out. And then to do that, you might then need to start digging up tracks or fix the bits of tracks, and you get into access planning.
Yep.
You then obviously got a bunch of people who want to sell train tickets or freight, or you want to move stuff around, and you get into timetable planning and timetable assessment. So there's kind of a thing which is that, you've asked for this, we've offered you that. So there's kind of a whole thing about bid offer. And this is where you kind of end up in some of those arguments about the split between track and train that kind of make that a bit more edgy, certainly if you've gone for a highly marketing level of thing. So those 2 things are linked. You then want to take that timetable, and then you kind of move from this kind of beautiful 6-month, 12-month, 18-month view, which goes into the timetable, to what the hell are we going to do today? And that's operations, And then finally, after the fact, you need to have an argument, and you could have an argument about what went wrong, or you could have an argument about whether, a ptarmigan is a small or a large bird. and therefore caused a delay. So there's kind of a whole
Yes, yeah.
set of things kind of going through, and it is all about temporal. Anyway, and on the other hand is the bear. So in Sheffield, there's a bear pit. So apparently in the botanical gardens, and rather than keeping live bears, they built a steel bear because obviously it's Sheffield.
Well, that's it. So thank you to Sheffield for the steel bear in the bear pit. So yeah, we have the, if you like, the varying aspects of the timetable, and I suppose that then takes us from that fairly simple sort of sundial, if you like, of right. Well, you have to do this, then you have to think about this, then you have to then a model of operation, which is a bit more complex. So on screen right now, everyone is it's not that complicated, to be honest. And if you broke it into all of its various individual elements, it'd be much more complicated. But it's a diagram with varying arrows with numbers and several, mostly green, but some blue and yellow dots describing which team things sit within. And it's well, I tell you what, Will, what is it? Tell us what it is.
So I got him dragged into trying to make sense. So we're trying to do an industry timetable strategy piece of work. About 5 or 6 years ago, and we just constantly ended up with arguments about who did what and when. And so I just sat down and went, well, I look after a lot of timetable and operational systems in terms of project delivery. So can I work out who I need to talk to about whatever it is? And can we stop having an argument? Because one of the things about it is that people will try and double claim things that they don't actually have any responsibility for and then miss bits. So it's kind of, so this is basically meant to be a really simple project model that I could explain how the hell is it that the whole of the timetable planning world works. So it ascribes, so the dark green bits are railway undertakings, that's freight and passenger operators. The light green bits are the people who sit within our national timetable planning or system operator function. The blue bits are bits that then on the day, so they're within the routes and the regions. And then finally, we have the performance team. And so then there's some stuff at the top. So you need a model, so you need a map, which is the infrastructure model, and you then need to understand what that map's telling you. So you need to have, line speed, you need to have gauging information and all this kind of other stuff. So basically, it starts off with, I want to run a train, all right? So I'm starting off in timetable planning, and I'm sitting in my, LNER office, and I'll put a bid in. And then I've got to get, and then you need to check against all of those bids, and I'll get an offer back. So, but to do that, I then need certain information. So I need to kind of understand, gauging, if it's freight, axle weight, electrification, which then kind of gets into this kind of feeding in. So both of us need to understand, and if you're into the whole world of the RT3793 paper around out of gauge freight, but that's another bane of my life. And that's, so we both need to share a view of that, and that's what sits on Network Rail. Then within the passenger or freight train, you need to have somebody to drive the train. You then need to know that you've got the locomotives and the units available. And you've then also got to understand how fast can it go. You've got to understand how many passengers it can take. So there's a bunch of stock capability. And this is all stuff you need to have so you can do the timetable, right? That's the first part. The next part you end up in is then saying, well, okay, we've agreed that we can run this and we've got a plan for the next 6 to 12 months. Then each day I need to publish the timetable because I might need to make tweaks or changes to that. And then that timetable gets published to all the route control systems in operations and all of the train control operations. And there really is quite a big siloed gap between all of this. So, and then what you do is you manage that on the day. So this is a timetable planning view. And after the fact, you then look at how did we do, chaps? So what I hadn't realised, though, is that actually when you're building a business case to build your high-speed railway across Liverpool to Hull, the way you do that, a lot of the economic planning is about taking performance data, but aggregated over quite a long baseline, 1, 2, 3 years, and then you hand it across the strategic planners, because what they do is they build a model based on what we've got as the network and how did it run. And then on the basis of that, they then come up with a strategic plan of where you want to put the electric, where you want to build a bunch of business cases. And then that'll then have two things. So you kind of want to then let the timetable folk know that there will be a new railway available in 5 years' time. So take a notice of that. But also that when you're building a junction, You've got to let the access planners know that they're the work that they need to do, and then they're going to take capacity away, which is where that kind of final line 23 kind of pops in to say, well, actually, there were no trains running in and out of York on the bank holiday weekend because we were doing a bunch of infrastructure work. And that kind of, at a really facile high level, is how it works, I think.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to enough people who kind of go, well, yeah, all right.
And it's a model, and it means you can create, from this, you can create, it's funny because I'm in the process of creating one of these for the test tracks, because this is more of a hello everyone, peek behind the curtain. That's some actual Network Rail business chat going on that you can all be privy to briefly, which is why I'm going to end that conversation now, and Will and I'll have the conversation later. But it's really important to have this, and it's amazing how much of our industry, and I'm not just going to say Network Rail, but I do mean Network Rail as well, and this isn't controversial. I don't think it's a thing that's going to get me shouted at too much. It's amazing how much of Network Rail, but how much of the rail industry doesn't have this written down and doesn't fully understand its operational model at a massive scale. And if you don't get that right, it's difficult to then get the incentives right to then understand how to improve things, and strategic planning have their design, performance have their, but again, all of this isn't a perpetual motion machine. There is external input of the big question mark of what do we want to do with it all, and that often it doesn't exist. And at the moment, I'd say the railway is trying to be a bit of a perpetual motion machine and second guess what it should be doing long term without the strategic leadership of either a single government or railway body, focusing that.
But the other point then is, just because we're talking about data, is each of those lines corresponds to, so you have your data within your box, but actually the really important bit is that you need to define what is the information you need against each of those lines, and that's all data, and that's all. And part of the problem with it is that we always use, I think one of the things I said in one of my early talks at the PWI is we've got 6 different maps.
Yep.
And that makes it really difficult. So if I'm planning on one map and then I'm running on a different map and then doing performance on a different one,
and that's before, and I know you've improved this, Will, because we've had long conversations, and that's before you talk about data that is not geospatially referenced, that is just, and is not even in a single Excel spreadsheet that you can at least then export. It's in Word document tables at the back of individually controlled Word documents and that gets published as a PDF in different formats with different columns with different spacings that mean that you also cannot easily trawl. Even if you're then a Will Deakin nerd, you can't necessarily consistently trawl that PDF to get the data out, let alone it just being in automatically pinned, database driven and just pinned straight into the main map. That's frustrating. And I know, Will, you are personally with others solving quite a few of those problems, but it's an uphill struggle because someone has to, as you say, these lines here, people have to take ownership of the quality condition of that data. They have to take ownership of the idea. They have to take responsibility for whether that data is correct. And this is a thing that frightens people when they've got, quite often with route teams, they're just trying to keep the railway running, and they don't necessarily see things that are, sadly, the way that the railway is run, and this has only been reinforced in the last couple of years again, off the back of CP6 and CP7. This has got worse again. It's keep the railway running desperately, and anything that's involves thinking about the future is extremely difficult to find time to do that if you're at the front line. Yeah,
it's also, kind of having worked in various industries before, some industries are set up to absorb change, so they kind of have a run rate of resources and people, and then add 10% because they know that there's going to be a massive amount of change.
Yep.
And other industries and organizations are running at the bare minimum, and that then means the ability to make change or take responsibility or step outside of that becomes actually quite risky because you don't necessarily have the capacity to take on those kind of extra things. But anyway, let's move on quickly before.
Yeah, this is where we have to take both of us slipping the lanyards that neither of us are wearing off and saying, Anyway, so we talked about planning. I have to talk a bit about train preparation. So all of that model, admittedly, what can look intimidating, but I think you talking through it, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, no, that is just explaining how this works, the previous diagram. It's just another way of describing how this works. But how do you go from that planning to actually then preparing trains? So we've got our big orange arrow on train preparation. Will,
so this is probably one of the areas I've got least expertise on. Yes. You're now talking about outside of infrastructure management, but I mean, and passenger trains tend to be relatively straightforward. You end up with a fixed, multiple unit set, and its length and its weight and its characteristics are all pretty well understood.
Yep.
Where train preparation gets really quite interesting is when you start looking at freight. I mean, so I've been involved in a piece of work looking at what was called data entry prior to mission start to support ETCS level 2 on the East Coast main line. All right. And the number of parameters you need to consider to successfully kind of automate the regulation of speed on a freight train is just, I mean, man, the hours we just spent kind of going through those documents, just kind of look at those. And it's really important because, again, you have the planned consist, which is the lineup of the units that you've got, and then there's the actual. And to run a safe railway or to run an effective railway, you really need to have a really good understanding of that and the variability of, and this is where wagon management rather than, I don't know, train consist management comes in. But I mean, I haven't got a lot more to say. But you've then also got to check it against compatibility to make sure you don't run an electric train off the wires, or you don't run a big Euro cargo unit through a tiny little train. And I think that kind of refers to the next slide.
Well, I suppose off the back, and yes, we'll put the loading gauge slide back up in a second, but I suppose it's like, it's things like, if you have particularly if you're moving, well, the thing that defines the speed, the allowed speed that ETCS is giving the traffic management system, but also particularly ETCS itself is giving the train its authorization to proceed, has to be based on the weight of the train. And therefore, because the weight of the train is defines how quickly it can brake. And if you have a moving block system where the braking performance defines the safe space around that train, then it cannot be lighter. If the system thinks the train's heavier, then you're not running an efficient railway. So you putting a load of extra fat in the system to make sure it's safe isn't necessarily the right thing to do because you're reducing the efficiency of the railway. But if you have a exactly as reported system, and exactly as reported means that the system thinks the train is lighter and it's actually heavier and therefore will brake and exceed its safe, exceed what that block thinks it should be, then you have a dangerous railway, you have a dangerous situation, you have the equivalent of an old-fashioned wrong side failure. So this stuff is very, very important when you're moving into modern signalling systems.
But you then also kind of end up with being, I mean, so where you have a driver, there's a kind of an accountability there that you're relying on their skill, and hats off to drivers. They are a very skilled and diligent profession. Where you're trying to automate some of that, you've got to then start taking into account things like gradient, because a heavy train going downhill is going to have a different characteristic. And you also haven't allowed, when it comes to freight, is that I hadn't realized there are like two different settings, and air braked versus mechanical brakes versus unbraked.
And that's before we start talking about railhead adhesion. So
well, just don't. Yeah, but if you could change each of those parameters, then it just involves hammering, just moving a lever on the back of a wagon. So you need to have a lot of data available if you're going to do train preparation from freight. Anyway,
and it has to be sanitized and sterilized, and people have to take ownership of and responsibility for that being as close to the real truth as possible. And loading gauge, here we are, the classic picture. It's always fun to pop it up. This is, you cannot put it'd be briefly very entertaining to watch, but you would not want to put a Class 66 in here, let alone a bunch of intermodal wagons behind it. It would make a mess. That picture from the Well As Your Problem podcast episode I did ages and ages ago that showed what happens when you put there's a larger gauge shunter that was being operated on an isolated depot, and it ended off going out onto the rest of the network and went under a British loading gauge bridge and got sausage machined. Thankfully, the cab wasn't in there because it was no one was in the cab because it was a runaway. But it got squat. I mean, it went through loading gauge, no problem. But the cab wasn't the same shape as it had started out being. So loading gauge important.
I mean, the one I like is a kind of the Victorian bridges, which have got those score marks.
That's the famous
kind of
picture.
Got the wagon it's kind of thrown out a bit as it's gone round the corner.
Yeah, there's that picture. If there's ever a talk about gauge clearance analysis, that picture, it's almost like a meme. You have to put the picture in of the box corner that's scored the edge out of the. There's two actually. There's one it's just gone through and scored right the way through a normal bridge, and there's another one that's a skewed arch bridge, but the skew is not quite parallel with the track, which means that if you only scan it in one place, this is talk about data sterilization and accuracy, scan it in one place, well, we've scanned it, that's fine, except that you scan it at one end of the bridge and you get a slightly different profile to if you scan it at the other end of the bridge, if you walk a few paces further along the track. Data, it's important. So then we move from we've had planning, train preparation, into the bit,
an element of wagon
yeah.
management, kind of talking about that kind of handover, and go on.
Yeah, and then the last bit is making it move, is actually doing it.
Yeah. And then there's kind of like two parts to this, and this is where it kind of gets interesting, because there's the safe movement and regulation of trains, which is kind of like sitting in the signal and driver, and then there's the, what do we do when things aren't going to timetable, or what do we do when things are going to timetable? Yeah.
So train operations, the last bit on this quite simple, but I think really neat little railway operating model. Train operations, and so you've got this this graphic. It's a little bit faded out actually in it, but I think it's fairly clear for those. And you can zoom in if you're on YouTube. By the way, that's a new thing you do. If you're on your phone, you can zoom in. Traffic management, high level processes. So this is about traffic management. Tell us about this. It's another model. So tell us what's going on.
Yeah. So about 15 years ago, there was a kind of an idea about that we needed to do something about having an agreed set process around traffic management. And so there was a national traffic management program kicked off before my time. Although I'm old, I'm not that old in the railway terms. So, and they just came up with this really neat model. And I was kind of going, why don't we use this more? So basically, it's about how do you get trains to run? And so you start off with the top left-hand corner as you take your timetable on the day. So you've taken the long-term timetable, you make some short-term changes. You might even need to make some changes the night before, but just don't do that in a Trans-Pennine way. But anyway, let's move on about P coding. And you then, everything's going right with the world, and you just look at your timetable, and then you monitor the movement of trains using your berth stepping and all those nice feeds. And that then allows you, and then you tell people about it. So your train will arrive. So you pass it on. So TM1 is just about manage and monitor train movements, and everything's gone perfectly well, sunny day, nothing's gone wrong, and then finally you tell people about it, and that's the kind of exchange of data. So you kind of go TM6, TM1 down to TM5, because nothing goes wrong on the railway.
Yeah, so that's that. Yeah,
and then what happens is there are kind of a couple of things that can happen. So let's say some drunks on a train decide to have a fight, and you've got to get BTP on board, or there's a broken signal, or a train breaks down, and so you then deal with the management of the route. And actually, that's really complicated. We've tried to look at coming up with some kind of incident management systems. And to be honest, you normally are better off just having something that acts as a sort of like a whiteboard where you just write down where you've got to. So you just track who's doing what and when.
Yep.
And that could also involve having to manage getting people onto track, which is, again, ludicrously dangerous. So you need to make sure that you're successfully and safely managing infrastructure access. So those two bits, I would say that you want to be quite careful about the way that you're managing that in terms of IT and data. So the stuff I tend to deal with doesn't do that. But what's happened is, so the train's broken down, you've got a shunter, you've shoved it out the way, you put it in a loop and everything's good. You then end up with where you think things ought to be, and then where things actually are, and then you want to make a series of decisions that aren't safety related to do with how do I restack the timetable. And the problem with it is that a lot of this is just done based on, with the best will in the world, kind of like experience, or just kind of trying to work out shouting at people across a room. So the whole idea, one of the big things that I think you can, and we've started to demonstrate some of this, is that you can actually have IT systems that could look at what the timetable is meant to be, the characteristics of the trains you've got, and then work out what would be the best way to actually recover from that position to get people moving again and to get freight moving again. And it might be an unpopular decision to kind of cancel half the trains, but it then at least means that if you know that within 5 minutes, you don't have to wait for 2 hours for that decision to be made.
Yeah, and
so
also you can tune your system to make what is the factor that you want to optimize for, and if the optimized factor is the least number of people on trains not moving, and that's your like primary prioritized thing, then the system can sufficiently prepared prioritize based on that, and that can sometimes be counterintuitive on a complex on a complex system like the railway. Though that isn't necessarily instantly intuitive. It's always worth having someone sense check it. Of course, it needs to go. It needs to be a human in the loop, but it's good to. It's not necessarily intuitive when you have a complex. No. Even just on the East Coast Main Line, it's not necessarily intuitive because the East Coast Main Line is complex enough.
Yeah, and part of it is also is that if you haven't got passenger loading on trains, how are you going to make that decision? So you kind of, if you've got an outcome you want to achieve, you start needing to find ways of getting certain types of data that you aren't necessarily having freely available. So you then need to start sharing more information between operators and control staff, because they will make different decisions based on the information. And then there's a whole business process change and everything else. I mean, because again, for me, technology is easy. It's the people that's the hard part.
Yep, 100%. And as you say, this is where I hope GBR will provide some light rather than heat in the fact that it should just be default shared for that sort of information, train loading information. And, that's the sort of thing where you can see where people might panic at the idea of sharing how busy a train is. Commercially, some people might, but I don't care about those people. But, they can. But the reality is, like, how busy a train is, you can just, if you're planning something nefarious, all you need to do is stand at a platform and watch that train every day for a week, and you'll know whether a train is a busy one or not a busy one. So ultimately, it's a bit like if we get panicky about sharing data because we fear it from a security perspective, I'd say it's the locking the aeroplane door, the kind of the cockpit door situation, is that actually that's probably killed more people than it has saved, thanks to the fact that in the aftermath of 9/11, we introduced a lock system for the doors of airliners, and that's had a result of there being several suicides where the door was locked from the inside, no way of getting in, and the plane has crashed, as well as some other incidents related to it. The Helios flight where they had the very slow decompression, and again the locked door was a problem. But no one will ever hijack a plane in the way they did for 9/11, because that's happened now. The horse is bolted on that, and every passenger, unlike up to 9/11, where hijackings were all fine, basically, like the risk in a hijacking was very low for you as a passenger up until 9/11. After 9/11, the opposite was true. Everyone's now like, oh, this plane's being hijacked, we're all going to die. Well, in which case I'm going to do something about it. Like, that's gone, that's changed. And so actually, that's it. The reason I'm giving this story is because it's an analogy to sharing of data, and it ties to something which I've not included slides on, but that I know that you and I share a passion about, which is real open data, not open data on the railway marketplace, the rail data market, but actual open data that is actually open, accessible, and usable for all. And there's a lot of pushback on that from a commercial, but also from a supposed security perspective, and that irks me, because a lot of it should be. It should require much more justification to not make something open data rather than what it is now. I love the JIRDAP, and it never really went anywhere, or my feeling is it never quite went where it should do, which is a document of yours.
But the thing but I think there's kind of like a discussion. I mean, again, we can talk about this some other time, but I think there has actually been a change in culture. I think there is more of a prove to me why it isn't, as opposed to default, oh no, we'll scare the horses, or we'll share it.
Well, I hope so. Well, it's good that you've seen that. The JIRDAP, by the way, that's the Joint Rail Data Action Plan, which was a document. Was it literally your document, Will? That document?
No. I was involved in
okay, yeah. But it was about prioritising the opening out of data, which you look at the success where data has been open. You look at the success stories that are associated with where there have been major releases of data. Tom Cairns' real-time trains is an example of one of the most successful examples of the use of railway open data, I think, out there. It's just spectacularly powerful, and that's probably why a lot of the rail industry's incumbents are very suspicious of it, because it shows up. It showed up. Tom has shown our industry up substantially by how good that website is, and he regularly gets pestered by the rail industry because of how good that website is. So anyway, that's another story as well.
And I will also need to make a shout out to Mr. Hicks, who
yes,
is the,
of course, to open train times,
and when it comes to the OT, when it comes to making data available as well. So,
very much friend of the show, and someone else who needs to be on here as well. Actually, Peter will make it happen. Okay. But anyway, right. So And then the reality at the front line, and our significantly overworked signallers as they are across the country, and everything they have to process. Will, talk us through what that looks like.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. I mean, so there's a system which is the national view, which is we're currently replacing, called Control Centre for the Future, which will shortly be the train movement view, which allows you to have a signalling diagram or a lineup view. So you've kind of, on the left-hand side, you've got, I think, a CCF panel, and on one of that gives you a kind of linear representation at a location of trains coming through a location, and the top one kind of gives you a kind of wiring diagram. And then on the right hand side you've actually got the interlocking, so you've got the workstation panels, and this is kind of like a stock image I nicked off the internet, so apologies, I don't know who it is other than he's obviously an esteemed colleague, but this is kind of what you're dealing with. Is you've kind of got a national view, you then end up with kind of like a route or intermediate mesoscopic view, and then finally you've got the signaller who then does safety critical decisions around the individual movement of trains through signals and set points. So and that kind of obviously affects the criticality of the changes you've got to make.
Yeah, and
I mean that's just it. But that's the pointy end. Yeah,
exactly. It's a spiky end where the reality is a workstation, one or more signalers, and an extreme, they are very much the front line of making calls that have a it's not the case that signalers are necessary. I mean, they absolutely are safety critical roles and do have the safety trains very much in their hands. That to a greater extent that's been automated, but they absolutely control a lot of people's well-being and health, if not their immediate safety anymore. Which they, by the way, they absolutely still do have that. But for the most part, the changes, the decisions they're making are about, okay, which trains are being deprioritized or prioritized, and these things, and ensuring that it's all running smoothly. For the most part, automatic route setting is running the railway system. And the traffic management system is doing it, but signalers are absolutely the front line, and therefore all that you trace back through all of what we talked about, all that data, the relationships between different data holders and data creators, people responsible for data, its creation or its manipulation, and this is the outcome is, well, the output is people on trains moving around or goods on trains moving around, but the signalers and of course the drivers are the ones who are at the receiving end of those decisions and all that context behind them. So it's important to think about that. And it's also a shame that there aren't better pictures of workstations. I suppose people get a bit sheepish about having reasonably up-to-date pictures of it.
That's where you start getting people getting a bit more worried about the kind of security impact of that. But let's just That's
another story. But because it's fascinating to see them. It's very, very interesting to see the workstations and what they look like, because there's a hell of a lot of very interesting information on them. Spatial data. So we talked about temporal data. Will, let's jump into a very different dimension altogether, time and space. And so this is where we jump into a slide deck that's very much more I've just lifted it entirely, and I want to talk through this story. We've been going for a fair while, but I think we've got 15 minutes to kind of talk through this, or 20 minutes to talk through this fun story about maps, and so tell. I shall guide us. I shall just do some pressing. Tell us the tale.
Okay, so a couple of Christmases ago, I was kind of got involved, and I mean I was aware. So there were a couple of things that needed to happen. So the first thing is that there'd been a freedom of information, which is where Mr. Hicks comes in, of the centerline track model. So there was kind of like, we finally had a relatively accurate map of where all the track was on the mainland Britain. And then what happened is that the Department for Transport decided to publish a kind of set of data based around, I think, 2018, 2019, of all of the origin destination for the financial year, so kind of April to April, of where people were travelling. And so there was a kind of a sort of an exchange. There's a guy called Alistair Ray, who's based in Sheffield, who I kind of know, who does a bunch of visualizations. And he did sort of like, there's kind of like a star diagram. If you know where locations are, you can just draw a straight line between them, but it doesn't really. So I said, well, I've got the centerline track model. I've kind of got the origin destination. So why don't I use that, do some tricks with the shortest path algorithm, and then just add up where all of the bits of the track and all of the bits of passengers over the 12 months were running. But you kind of, so my original intention, as I think I'd say, I can't remember exactly which slides we've got here, was to actually produce a map of what was happening in Britain, because I had certain slightly jaundiced opinions of where railway traffic landed.
Yeah.
But to do that, I then also needed to do a map for each of the stations in Britain. And yeah, so what I then did is I did the kind of aggregated data, but then said, well, I've got 2,500 or 2,580. Yeah. So I'll just do a picture of each of them, and then I'll stick them on the web, and then somebody can click and look at their station. And this was when Twitter wasn't quite the same level of bin fire that it currently is. And so I published this because it took a few days. I mean, I'm not that quick, but it was kind of between Christmas and New Year, and I can publish this on around the 1st of January 24, and then within about 2 or 3 days I'd had like 500,000 people looking at it. And then this is actually a quote from Bloomberg. This is actually they interviewed me, and here's some slides that I've just kind of taken this from that interview, and it's based on here are 2 of the 2,500 bits, and they had a spin on that, so I did that. The guys at it was Open Data Institute in Leeds, so it's the Open Innovations Group.
Yes, Open Innovations now. Yeah.
And they were kindly, they thought it was pretty cool. And so I did a kind of a blog post for there. And then, I don't know if it was kind of important, but basically we seem to be now getting all of the data. So then there was a drop of 2019 through to 2023. Yes. So there was like a 5-year view. And then I think we seem to be getting them coming through each year. So I've kind of been trying to track this. So we've now kind of got, so you start being able to do a time series view.
Yes, and we'll get to that. And I've got that graphic up actually. Yeah. So in the beginning, you kind of collected the data sets, as you say, and you kind of created this visualization, which is very nice actually. It's
well, it is, but it's what I think. Just I kind of had what hell's going on, Alistair? We've kind of got 500,000 people looking at it over 3 days, and you went, yeah, well, because it looks a bit like a Cthulhu that's sitting on, it's an elder god that's sitting on London, and I kind of went, yeah, that's probably about right.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's representing. It's representing two things. Well, firstly, our railway is largely at capacity, so you can kind of almost say these are the number of, this is you can almost one-to-one say, well, this is the capacity of these lines. Actually, it's representing the journeys made on the railway, but the reality is that it's, for the most part, it's just representing the rail capacity on these bits of railway line. And as you say, it shows just how much the network is oriented towards flows to London. And from London and not much else. Although there are some very interesting thick flows on other bits. Cross-country route is visible there, for example.
You could see that, but I also think the interesting thing about it then is that if you look around the kind of the urban, so you've got this massive urban pull into London, and then if you look at the major, so spot where the major cities are in. Yeah,
because basically you've got a point that on this scale of map it's like of zero length, and therefore it's made a bit of a diamond shape, and that's the kind of the very short but massive suburban flows with the very limited suburban rail networks that exist outside of London, and that is interesting.
And also then up in Glasgow.
Yes. Yep. So you can see where there are some suburban, where there is and these are the cities that have some semblance of a suburban rail network. That is Liverpool, Manchester, West Yorkshire, Leeds, and Glasgow. Those are the cities that have, and Birmingham, of course. Well, what's interesting is Birmingham not so much, which surprises me, but I suppose perhaps actually because Birmingham is a larger, spread out city, the shape has spread a little bit. So the cross-city line, for example, there is sort of, a little more sort of spread, a little more spread thin. But those cities that have funnily enough, the cities that do have a suburban rail network have high usage of that suburban rail network. Funny that.
Who knew?
Who knew? So that's it's very interesting. So as you say, Alistair did the straight line piece, and it did his visualization, which was really fun. But as you say, not quite as soon as you did yours, Alistair's someone absolutely to follow on Twitter, by the way, and socials, wherever Alistair is, some really lovely data visualization of all sorts going on. So that was the shortest path. So that was the straight line, but then the centerline track model exists, right? So,
but exactly, but that's the straight line for one location. This is what the data looks like.
This is the data.
Actually, he drugged it off the Rail Data Marketplace and had done some stuff to make it easier to work with. So but then because of my day job, I kind of knew how to geographically map CSV file that he kind of hopefully massaged. I mean, I had to do some extra work to get it to work with the next set of data, and it's just that. So, yeah, I mean, there was a load of data wrangling. I mean, I'm not sure I was being particularly social with my family that Christmas holiday, so I might have got a bit moaning, but yeah, it was quite an interesting project. And then, but the thing that kind of hadn't got, I mean, because I was just going to go for that big green monster. That was the point I was going to make. But the thing that really kicked off was the fact that
it's the individual stations. People are fascinated by that. Yeah.
I mean, because you needed to simplify it. You needed to kind of work out the connecting station. There's York. I always kind of like to go back to that.
That's nice.
You needed to split this track where you've snapped the station location because the centerline track model doesn't necessarily directly align. So there's some technical stuff in there.
So, So it's kind of tidying and again, data sanitization. You've got to kind of make that data actually. They all has to speak to itself. And so, as you say, this is what you planned, which was the giant Cthulhu, which is interesting. Like, this is an interesting output, and there are some interesting stories to tell there. And again, Will, you and I are going to be, when I have more breathing space to think about this stuff, there is more for us to do with this. I have quite a few thoughts on what to do with this data that hasn't been done by anyone yet. That I think there's some seriously interesting opportunities. Not least, by the way, in getting hold of the OD data that's not for railways and mapping that onto the railway and seeing what that does, what that looks like.
We'll hold that thought because I might just want to talk about that a little bit just at the end. But anyway, keep on going. Yep.
So as you say, what you did was output per station, and people loved that. They were fascinated to see what people's travel to and from their station was, and also the scale of that flow. It's very interesting, and the Sheffield one's really nice because it does look very much like it looks like a picture of a circulatory system there. It's got this very kind of sort of vascular look to it that's quite nice. And then I just want to end on this is on this particular segment is as you say, you've started getting time related data, which means that this graphic here is showing the growth in ridership since through COVID, through the pandemic. And you can see the growth coming in there back to pre-COVID levels as we've discussed at length. In fact, you can literally compare that, because if I wait for the 2019 one again and put a little score on the width, so there's the edge of the 2018-2019, and you can see that we have now we've gone beyond it. In fact, so that's quite nice.
And I was trying to do some visualizations looking at how you reflect on change across time on a single graphic. And I know there's some stuff on LinkedIn, but I just wasn't happy. I mean, one of the things, I think it needs to look nice, and I think these look nice. But yeah, I mean, what's interesting is the East Coast Main Line, absolutely. The West Coast Main Line maybe a bit less, but then that talks a little bit about, are we already at capacity? And there's also a load of engineering and some other stuff going on. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's only so much air you can pump into a bicycle tire. At some point it gets harder and harder, and things slow down. So we talked about temporal data, we talked about spatial data. Let's talk about big and bigger data, because here's my muggins and the new there are a few new thumbnails popping up for RailNatter at the moment as I transition into a better run ship, let's put it that way, with a bit of help. So this is our Wales needs a new North-South Railway. This was our Wales data episode, which led to the Dragon Line and other things. And it was a fun episode, but it was based on a bunch of data outputs that you sent me, right? That episode was based on a bunch of data outputs that you sent me, and then I kind of ran with that, and you helped convert the data outputs into a format that I could then process, and so on and so on. But you've been running with this data, behind the scenes, not just you, Will, but other people as well behind the scenes, in the Discord server. I've been playing with data and thinking about data and thinking about the logic of what I did on that episode and running with it. And you've been doing that, and so there's lots of other data sets that we've been getting better versions of as we've moved through. And, the MSOA travel to work census data here is visualized. You've put this up, which is very interesting. And it gives us the power to do some things, which I think is, as you often talk about, Will, it's you like playing with the data and doing creating something that's useful for the data, but actually you're interested. The reason we often have chats is because you're interested in what ideas I have about what I can muck around with that data and do and create, and how that might play into a bigger picture. And that's interesting. So I'm just going to go through a few of these that you've been talking about. So this is chip in with what you want to say about these.
I mean, so part of the problem is that the census in England and Wales took place during COVID. So I'm not sure how good the.
Yeah, it's not hugely useful. It's not useful. It's in fact extremely annoyingly not useful. Yeah.
Well, yes, but the thing about it is, and for anonymity, so there's a data set. So just getting into census geekdom, but you have the middle super output area, and that's interesting because that's actually then you can get a data set that's segmented by travel to work method. So there is actually like cycling or active or working from home or whatever, but the MSOA is kind of about 6,000 people, so it's kind of a lot blockier.
Yeah.
And then there's actually a data set which is the output area, which is about 600 people, where they publish the full lot, but they don't tell you how they traveled. So you kind of, I mean, what I've just done is like a thing, and you know, a shout out to Deirdre for suggesting. So what I did is I just kind of put all the points and then built a network based around a thing called a Delaunay triangle, which is kind of like a way of covering an area and then just overlaying the data you've got, and you end up, and it's kind of interesting though, if you look at the comparison, they look very similar, but there are differences when you get into more detail there. But there's that, but that's what it is. So that's just a straightforward, take some census data, build a network model based around the points where you've called them out, and then just do the same things I did before, which is that you make it as wide as you've got, based on the number of people who are traveling between different places.
And what's interesting about this is basically that Wales map approach. This one is you know the output area, because as you say, this is everyone traveling. This is showing you what the network needs to be doing for any given pathway, and that's very interesting. It's interesting to see, you know, what that means and what that looks like, but this in and of itself isn't the rail network, of course. This is the flows of humans. How you facilitate these flows, you know, this is where you then go into, well, actually, you need to homogenize this more to have a more, you know, we can only have this many kilometers of infrastructure of this certain capacity and quality, and then that change. But you know, this is powerful as hell. It's extremely complex to do a huge amount with detail of this at a national level.
Yep.
But once you start getting into regions, it becomes interesting, and we will pick up the first of these that we're playing with RailNet in the Discord was the East Midlands. We will do an episode on the East Midlands and about what the East Midlands transport network needs to look like. That will be coming, and other regions besides, and we will do it through the automated approach, and we will pick up and run with that, and it'll be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to those, to getting the headspace to getting back into that. But so the next one of these is the estimated, so you've got here, you've got the 2011, and then you've got the 2021 showing how much less movement there is because it's the middle of COVID, right?
Well, the thing is that then, so there is a data set, there's an experimental data set where they've actually tried to correct for that, and I was just trying to look at to see, and I think there might be two things. So one of which is the kind of, and we've talked about this before, which is the, you know, working from home phenomena. So that's obviously kind of helping a bit. But there's also a thing which is that it's based on taking what was measured in the census and then applying a series of algorithms to try and guess what it should be. And again, you know, I don't mean to throw stones, but to me it shows graphically that there might be some weaknesses in the approach that's been taken. And I don't know anybody who's doing that work, so I'm not trying to cast any shade, but
this is a perfect representation of, you know, these should look the same. Basically, they should look the same because the variation shouldn't be so radical. We're not moving around that
so about
much
mid Wales. I mean, to be honest, those people are probably going to have to travel whatever. Sorry, I have a kind of a Welsh family connection, and in fact, in one of my talks, I go on and talk about the importance of garths. But yes, so it's just interesting to see that, and I think the model they've used underrepresents low frequency or low use bits, because I don't think it's it's the model you apply. I don't know how you do it. The
troubling thing is, and this is where context is important, what's happening with this data? Well, this interpretation, this model is what's driving decisions about transport policy. And you can see that it is underrepresenting the amount of mobility that happens
in rural areas.
In rural areas, particularly, yeah, and also in what I call the in between areas. In the hinterlands, which is most of England, is a hinterland. You've got the big cities, but actually a lot of England is pretty high density is let's say high, medium to high density population densities, but not specifically a city. So it's the hinterlands between, and again, massive underrepresentation of the flows in these areas. You just, and that's what is currently driving policy about transport, and it's driving decisions about what type of transport investment needs to be made, and it's driving their own decisions. And that's, this is not all of the whole policy picture is not being entirely driven by this, but this is the sort of thing that will be a factor. There'll be mandarins picking this up and going, well, the data says, without necessarily doing the validation check that you've done here. So this is really important work. This is fun. Where's Britain?
Well, yeah, but I mean, and this kind of follows on from a thing where I did a previous thing, which I'll talk about briefly at the end, which is where's Europe? And it's quite obvious where is Britain, but where there are parts that are clearly core nailed on Britain, but there are parts that start getting a little bit more like, well, is it, isn't it? And I mean, I don't want to having been shouted out about, no, it's the islands of Northern Europe, or and I can understand the political sensitivities with that, and the British Isles probably is historically a difficult title, but I don't know what else to call it, and I'm kind of trying to find a way. But so yeah, I'm just going to say, so I've just taken a picture of Britain and then buffered it out a bit, because it then means that kind of like the inner islands sort of get connected into the network, and then when I do some of this stuff, certainly from a heavy rail, I'm unlikely to build a railway to Ireland or to the Shetlands or is it Harris? The big one off. Scotland.
Yeah, Harris and Lewis. Yeah,
which are important, but there's only so far I'm prepared to go with a bridge or a tunnel.
Or a tunnel. Exactly. Yeah. And then you've started looking at node creation and network creation,
and this is kind of like, this is more like underliving. So this is where you start. So you start off with all the nodes. That's the OA census nodes.
Yeah,
that's the network you get if you apply that Delaunay triangle.
Yes.
So if you just do a single same width edge, that's actually what it looks like. If you wanted to join everybody with the same level of railway, you'd end up with a network look like that based on where people live. And then you've got to start doing some stuff to prune it, which I think is where the next set of slides.
Exactly, and that's So this is where you're going. Well, okay, it's managing the edges, and there's a process that you go through, and also, as you say, that the populations are one way of looking at what you prioritize for trunk routes. When there's more to do on this, there's when I get some headspace and. I think there's some thought to be done on how you then take this and turn it into a tool for defining what the ideal rail network needs to be, and that's kind of ultimately what we're talking about, and what and changing that based on what sort of rail network are you talking about, and actually you could get to a point where you could automatically say, well, these lines are going to be suburban network because of the density that we're talking about and the distances between nodes. These are going to be, and then you will need a high speed network that can do this, and this is the optimized high speed network, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And you say, so there's your core edges.
So the previous one. The prune one is actually more of a this is the negative. These are all the bits that
you've
when
got
I do the shortest path algorithm I have to throw away.
Yes.
And one of the key parts about it is I don't have the Scottish data, which is why the whole of the Scottish network is thrown away. So I'm kind of making a point here, which is that, hey guys,
publish your data better.
But it's also because I've built the network using the output area data. You throw away a lot more edges if you're using the super output area data, where you have a far denser bit. So I'm sorry, I mean, these are kind of slightly pedantic points about just doing that, which I go through in one of my talks. So that's the core network. That's what you end up with once you do that. So that's everything's got an equal path, and then you adjust the widths based on the number of aggregated journeys.
Yes, and that's the process. That's so from here. So full network, all edges. So you go from nodes to edges. You prune all that lot. You then have the equal width lines.
Yeah.
And then you apply and this is the people moving on them, and then you get what looks like a more familiar. Well, here's the flow, and you can see cores, you can see trunk routes, you can see the trunk routes starting to emerge. The lines of higher flow. You can start seeing this stuff, and also. Yeah, so this is powerful. This is powerful stuff, and it allows you to think, well, what are the key flow corridors going to be? And therefore, where do we want to prioritize capacity and prioritize that flow? And also, critically, as I talk about in the book, you shouldn't be thinking about railways of, well, this is the railway, and what happens if we have this small single-digit percentage of additional growth over this many years? No, you go, how much mobility do we want to facilitate in the country, independent of how that mobility is facilitated? And then what's the best way to facilitate that mobility on that particular, connection between nodes? And then you can go bigger. And that's where... Talk about Europe. Tell us about Europe, Will, and the fun you've been having on a larger scale, and where you've gone with that.
So I need content, as my daughter once described me as a super micro public transport influencer. You do need that.
You and me both.
Yeah, well, I think you've got a bigger reach than me, man. Anyway, so I needed to talk. So I said, well, why don't I look at building a theoretical high-speed railway for Europe? And that's kind of, I was talking to you a little bit before about, where's Europe? Well, I don't know. So I kind of talk about that.
Yeah.
I've taken a bunch of the population data, but this is an as is. So this is a picture of where we currently
I've been cheeky because this is the as is, and it's not. I want people. This is me signposting people to your outputs to say, go find Will to see what he's said about, and we'll maybe do an episode about it in the future, because it'd be interesting for you and I to take different approaches to see what the comparison of my maybe slightly more hands-on, less automated approach would be versus your. The data-driven, that could be a kind of a fun exercise to do, I think, and that'd be a future episode for us to do. Well, I think,
and I think it is. But I think the thing that I actually then discovered about it, and it kind of coloured some of the stuff that maybe influenced, where I got to. So it's been a journey, man. Is the fact that my very theoretical. I mean, I like hexagons, so I kind of mapped the whole of Europe in hexagons and kind of drew this. And people don't relate to it because it's like, well, what does that mean to do with the existing railway? So that's why I need to start thinking a little bit about how do I bring existing transport networks overlaid with some of the other stuff that we've got.
And this is the trick. This is the trick. It's basically going, well, my theoretical network that I've created has this node-to-node connector or series of node-to-node connectors here, and we know from my model that it needs to have this much capacity over a given time period. Well, okay, is there a paralleling bit of railway? What's the capacity that bit of paralleling railway has that's mapped in the real world? Does that do the job? In which case, great, you've got that node-to-node connector sorted, boom. But more than likely, the answer is, well, actually, no, it's got 80% of it, or in the UK, it's got 50% of what, or less, 2%, 3% of what it needs to be. Well, okay, then that gives you a picture of, that allows you to output a picture of what work needs to go where and what percentage capacity uplift do you need on these lines. And that's the next step. That's, I think, Will, where we've got some fun to have. And how you do that. Because I think that's, you take the you jump back here, you compare this then to the centerline track model. And that starts being fun. You can start having some real fun there on well, actually this does work, this doesn't, and you can say, well, this is the percentage of modal share that the railway can accommodate on this flow. That's where you start having some real policy making fun, and no one's done that to my mind, certainly not in a public forum, and we will be the first to get there at this rate, frankly, Will. So I say what next? Well, we've kind of answered that. Hello to everyone in the chat, by the way. Sorry it's not live and we can't join you, but I'm sure Will certainly be in the Discord answering questions, because you spend far too much time in there, Will, and it's good fun, and it's a lovely community. So yeah, it'd be nice to have the chat. The last thing I wanted to put up though was, so that's a bit of the what next. Oh, actually, Will, was there anything else you wanted to add to the what next?
So there were kind of two things I've been playing with. So one of which is just to kind of look at how I make that, and one of the thoughts I've got is to actually do the overlay of the transport flows based on, say, primary road routes and then the centerline track model. And it's hard. And I'm going to have to get around to doing that. The other one is actually to try and pull together like a theoretical model. So when you're actually looking at the rates of that, there's kind of like a bit of a data science nerdery thing where you could actually look at, there's this idea of a gravity model, which is you've got population A, population B, and divide it by the square of the distance.
Yeah.
I'd actually be interested to see whether that's actually the case. But to do that, you need a load of data and some time just kind of sit down and do that. And this is a hobby. I mean, I've got a day job, I've got a family,
Yes.
I do various other things, and so it's just kind of like it will continue. But as you said, we've been at it probably. I mean, it was pre-COVID that I think I did.
It was, and I've not been on it as much as I wanted to be. The reality is that the two, and it's always a thing about the back of my head. And with Shenanigans last year, I was thinking, well, maybe this does become one of the things that I do on a more full-time basis, and I come and pester you for some of your time on a more permanent role. It's the sort of thing that you and I could, we could sit and full-time do this and create some fascinating and useful outputs. But no one would pay us for it, at least not at the start, and that's the so, But this is one of the joys of Rail Natter, is that it has given me a bit of time to justify thinking about some of this stuff more than I might otherwise, and also hopefully direct some of your thoughts. That the time you do spend on it is in some something that gets useful.
I get that. I mean, I have really enjoyed a lot of the interactions, because I've kind of like, people have gone, it's kind of like, well, that doesn't work for me, or have you thought about this technique or whatever. So there's kind of like a really good bunch of people out there.
Shout out to Detour, who might be in the chat just now. Detour on the YouTubes, and you can find in the Discord. Lots of time for statistician extraordinaire, and particularly she. There's a lot of good stuff that she puts out that inspires me, makes me think. But there are a load of other people in there in the Discord server, and Rail Natter community at large who really get stuck into this stuff and are nerds way beyond my capacity in this stuff, and it's really interesting. And I hopefully seed some thought on that front, even if I've not been as active in it as I'd hoped to be initially, and life got ahead of me as it always bloody does. The thing I wanted to end on, it's a bit of fun, which is I have these maps right now behind me, or one of them right now behind me, which is the one of the famous maps from part 2 of the Reshaping of British Railways, which is this map here. And although it's not hugely scientific because we don't have the exact flows. Well, actually, you might have measured it on since we've had chats, but in terms of mapping, I suspect these are maybe slightly. Well, I don't know, because flows in the 60s were quite high. Yeah, I was going to say this is today, or well, not quite today anymore because you did it a year or two ago. But this is the equivalent of the beaching map of map 1, which is the density of passenger flow, but represented. You've kind of recreated the look of the mapping to show what is and isn't happening in terms of passenger flows on what's left of our network compared to the 60s. Well, yeah, talk a bit about this one, because it's a bit of fun. It's a nice way to end.
No, good. And I did try to be quite careful about doing a bit of scaling, so I think the lines are not that dissimilar. The interesting thing for me is that if you look at the West Coast Main Line, it's busier than it was. Yes, I get it. It isn't exactly the same, but to the best of my ability, I did actually try and copy the styling based on the. Yeah. So it's interesting there that actually, whereas we've got a much more reduced network, parts of it are genuinely busier than they were under beaching. So if you look at the East Coast Main Line, the West Coast Main Line, guess what? That's looking to me a little bit tighter. It's not hugely different, but and I did try and make sure the scaling was as best as I could, just so I could just do the bragging rights on that. But yeah,
yes, yeah. Well, this is it. It's just an interesting. There's some very interesting, and it would be nice to attempt to dig in. If you could get to the National Archives, you get to Kew and get the data that was used to create this, to actually create the digital version of this, so you can genuinely make those comparisons. Now that would be interesting, because at the moment we're just comparing a PDF with a digital output, which is, you and I both know that's the same as holding up two photocopies next to each other and going, ooh, data. That's not quite. What would be nice, of course, is to recreate this based on the data that was used to create it, rather than it being just. That would be interesting. And so, Dr. David Turner, if you're out there, can we come and borrow your keys to Q, and we'll go dig out the data that was used to create this, because that would be very interesting. Although I would wonder whether that data still exists anywhere, because that would be tasty. So if there's anyone out there who wants to do that as a PhD, then crack on. No, that's Will. I mean, before we close out, I just want to say it's been a delight having you. Thank you so much to absolutely, yeah. It's been an absolute an absolute delight here. My flag, I'm not under duress. My LGBTQ plus flag is the right way up now. I had it upside down for a long time, and lots of people were messaging me saying, "Are you being held against your will?" And I was like, "No, I'm just an idiot." That's the key thing to understand here. But anyway, yeah, Will, thank you so much. That's been delightful. There's more for us to do. Absolutely more for us to do. And I'm sure we'll get lots of people going ooh, and sending us thoughts and queries and questions, and that'll be fine and a delight. Yeah, the usual. I tell you what, let me do this before we do a proper closeout. To audio only people, you'll be getting this, and you might be getting this. I think I'm a bit delayed on doing. I don't know where I'm on. Yeah, I might be a bit behind on podcast uploads, but you might well be getting this in edited form, which means you might have just had all of the waffle I just did chopped out as this is tidied up, or indeed this whole bit might be chopped out because James might decide to just get rid of this bit. But anyway, audio only people, thanks for listening. Do leave a review and rating on your favorite platforms, because the more people listen to this, it's going to basically this is now a different product to the YouTube. It's going to be a tighter. It's going to be closer to 40 minutes rather than the full hour, because we'll chop out the dross of my waffle and wibble. The usual outro plugs: GarethDennis.co.uk/merch for the merchandise, which is all going to be getting a refresh soon. GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for the Discord server where this chat continues ad infinitum. Hello everyone in the chat, I'm waving. PayPal.me/GarethDennis for loose change and abuse, and Patreon.com/GarethDennis. Very important. Patreon people, thank you so much to you, because you make this happen. You are now paying for some production as well. But also, if you want to support the show, if you want more fun stuff to happen, and we are ramping up on the behind the scenes extras, patreon.com/GarethDennis is where you can. It's cheap as hell. It's like £1. You get there are no benefits if you spend more money, or at the moment there aren't. That might be changed. Maybe that is going to change. But for me right now, I want to keep that all the same. If you're giving me extra money, you're doing that from the good of your heart. You're not getting anything extra. You just have more disposable income, which is, and you're putting it in rail natter world. So thank you for that again. Yes, so on the 16th of May, that is the 16th of Friday, the 16th of May, there is a paid for ticket from Aberdeen to Penzance. I have paid for this ticket. I will give it to you for free. If you're a Patreon person. So message me on Patreon or message me in the Discord server and say, yes, I want that ticket, please, and I will give you that ticket. No competitions, no battles. If more than one person comes and asks for it, then I will put you in a battle to the death with snooker cues, and the victor shall claim the spoils. No, I'll just discuss between the two of you, and I'll decide which one gets it. It's not a democracy. I'll just give it to the person I think is most gonna have the most fun on that journey. So make your suggestion. If you want to take that train, then let me know. There'll be a group of rail natterers going, but I have one free ticket to give out. Other people, there are also other tickets to give out that you'll pay for bits of. I might join a part of that journey. So you might see me, even if I'm not paying for the whole journey. Well, if I'm not joining the whole thing, I might join you for a bit of it and say hello. But that'll be turning into a Rail Natter episode in the future as well. So you'll all get to be in a Rail Natter if you do that. That should be fun. 3 dates coming up: 30th of April, 4th of June, and 10th of September. All Wednesdays, all at 2 p.m. All of these should now be on the hopetowndarlington.co.uk website, where you can go in, book the event, go and join. Tickets are limited. I'm presenting 2 different things. It's like a rail natter. It's like a live rail natter, basically. I'm doing the history of railways that isn't talked about, the pre-1825 history of railways, plus a bit of extra stuff. And then the future, the painting a picture of what railways will look like in the future, the Beyond 2025 story in September. So that should be a lot of fun. Please do go and join me for those. They're during the day, so it's a bit different timing-wise. So if you have a chance to come up and say hello on those, please do come along. Next week, episode 259, news. It's a news episode, so have fun joining us for catching up on some chaos that's been going on. That'll be a delight. Oh, my goodness. Will, sorry about that. The usual ramming through my outro before I say cheerio. It's been a delight, Will, and we will see you back soon to talk more about. It'd be fun to look at you. I think it'd be fun to take your Europe data to a point, but pre the network creation algorithm, and see how the two of us interpret that based on. Yeah, it'd be interesting. That'd be a fun little sort of data comparator, I think. But anyway. No, thanks so much for joining. Will, any last thoughts before we wave vigorously and
No, I mean, thank you very much. I mean, we kind of run on slightly, which I thought we might.
Yeah, 19 minutes. It's not the worst run on, but we've been reasonably sort of restrained, I believe.
No, that's cool. No, I mean, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I I wouldn't have done. I mean, so I should shout out to Xander as well. So
Yes.
thanks to him for
Xander yeah,
sorry.
absolutely.
So and
Veitch,
yeah,
sorry,
I mean,
wait a minute. It's EI, isn't it? So it'd be Veitch. Xander Veitch. Xander, correct me if I'm pronouncing incorrectly there. Yeah.
Yeah, really, and a few others. So who have been part of them. So apologies, too many to mention. But no, it's been a blast. I mean, I do it because it's fun. I know we've discussed before. If it wasn't fun, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you.
While it's still fun, we'll still be doing it. Will,
yes,
thank you so much, everyone watching. It's been a delight. All remains for us to shout cheerio vigorously through our microphones. Everyone, cheerio, cheerio.
Bye.